Right, so it's that time of the year where everything gets a little bit darker outside, the leaves start changing colors, and everything's just a teeny little bit spookier. Now, if you put two and two together, you're probably going to assume that I'm going to be making a Halloween-themed build. And, well, you're right. I mean, obviously, what else would I be doing here? But there is a tiny little twist, and that is that there's actually a Terraria Halloween Contest that I had no idea even existed. Hey Terraria fans, welcome back to the channel where today I will be making a speed build. However, we'll be doing something just a tiny little bit different because this build's actually be entered in this year's 2023's Halloween contest that the Terraria Discord is hosting, or I guess Terraria creators are hosting, but I saw it on the Discord and anyways, it was really interesting. I never knew this even existed, and quite frankly, I'm kind of surprised. I feel like I would have heard of this at some point. But I digress. The point is I'm going to be participating in this really interesting contest, and I think you should too. Now, that doesn't mean that you only have to build something. So for those people that are maybe not as comfortable with their building skills, there are alternative options. That's right, you don't have to be a pro builder, or whatever the hell I am, to actually submit something to this event. It's actually something that covers a couple of different categories, including pumpkin carving, some costumes, some artwork, or even a vanity set in games. Now, if that sounds like anything that you're actually comfortable with doing, or something that you're good at, highly recommend that you submit something. And yeah, it doesn't actually end today on Halloween. I believe the contest is open until November 5th, so you actually have a little bit of time to put something together. Anyways, with all that said, I'm also going to be trying something a teeny bit different today, which is going to be me actually talking for parts of the video while I'm building. So it will look a little bit strange, where you'll see the build and you'll see my face and you'll hear my voice, and it's not going to sync up. But the point is, we're trying something different to give you a little bit more insight into what I'm building and what I'm thinking, and maybe some background around why I chose the build that I did. All that said, guys, if you do want to see that kind of stuff in the future, or if you like that style, let me know in the comments down below. I just want to try different things and keep making the channel and the content a little bit more interesting for you guys who are watching. So as always, I of course appreciate any feedback. Oh, and speaking of feedback, guys, if you want to give me some feedback around anything I'm doing, you can actually do that live if you drop into the Twitch channel. We also just recently realized that you can start multi-streaming, which is amazing. So I will also be trying to stream at the same time on YouTube. Haven't really quite figured out how to get that to work correctly, but we did try it on Tuesday, or I think Thursday last week, I can't remember, but we're going to be doing that as well going forward. So hopefully you guys will be able to catch me either on Twitch or here on YouTube. Either way, exciting times. Right, so with all that said, guys, let's get to the build, shall we? All right, so like I highlighted a few moments ago, I am going to be giving some commentary over top of this while I'm building to see how this kind of registers with you guys and any other viewers. But basically, guys, while I was building this, one of the biggest challenges that I ran into was I actually first started building this pumpkin out of, well, unsurprisingly, some pumpkin. It didn't really work out. The textures were a little bit too much. I didn't really like the way it looked, and it just looked very blocky. And so I was trying to figure out what would maybe work, and there was actually quite a bit of experimentation during this build process. I know these speed builds make it look like that's not the case, but we eventually landed on actually using some silly balloon blocks and painting them deep orange, and I just think it looked really, really good. I then had to come up with a shape and actually decided to go with these little sort of shading bits in between, where I actually did use some pumpkin wall. So yes, there is some pumpkin in this build. Don't worry, we didn't totally ignore it for this design. Another area that I kind of played around with was the mouth, where I initially wanted to actually have both a top and bottom section of the mouth. I kind of ended up with, well, what you see here, which is just the top section and a tongue hanging out, and I actually really like the way the tongue looks. I know early on during the build, it's just made out of cactus and some other bits, nothing too crazy, but once we added a bunch of textures a little later on, I really like the way that this thing turned out. Another piece here that you're seeing is going to be this eyeball. I really like the way the eye turned out. It was really actually quite simple, just using some silly balloon wall and some silly balloon blocks on top, and just giving it a little bit of an angled look, and it just really looks a lot more evil this way. So super happy with the way that turned out. Now, another thing you'll see here are the gears and the legs. The gears themselves were obviously something I've used in other designs and weren't too tricky. What was tricky was actually coming up with the shape of the legs. I wanted something kind of creepy, and I think this kind of spider mechanical cyborgy look, well, it just kind of works. It's kind of the right feel. It feels a little bit more creepy and spooky, and something that's a little bit inspired by one of Sid's toys in Toy Story. I forget what that thing was called, but kind of went with that vibe, and overall think it turned out pretty good. Now, they also look pretty intricate, and don't let that scare you. It's just a bit of copper and tin plating, along with obviously the gears that I've made, some grates and some platforms, and a couple of streamers and a few other odds and ends. It looks like a lot, I think, for some people, but honestly, it's not too bad in the grand scheme of things. But anyways, that's really, guys, all I wanted to say about this. I think the rest of the build is going to kind of, well, go on its own here. You get a good idea of how this all comes together. There's nothing too spectacular. I kind of rinse and repeat with different shapes now. The legs, again, are a little bit tricky. I do appreciate that. And then we did a little bit of background work and landscaping at the end. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, guys. Again, listen to the music, enjoy the rest of the build, and we'll see you on the back end when I will be covering all of the materials in case you decide that you want to make something very similar. So yeah, we'll catch you at the end of this build. All right, guys, so with the build portion of this video done, I'm going to go ahead and quickly highlight all of the materials that I used to make this Cyborg Pumpkin thing, and hopefully it's not too convoluted, but basically there's two chests. This one's going to hold all of our paints, and this one's going to hold all of the actual material. So I encourage you to pause the video here if you want to take a slightly closer look, or if you want to pause here on the paints, you can do that as well. But that said, let's actually cover the paints, which I used here, and yeah, deep orange was a given to get that pumpkin look. I think that was really important. We also used some green and some deep green for the tongue and for the stem, and maybe a few other parts here and there. We also used some black paint, some deep red paint, some purple paint, some white paint, and some gray paint. Now, the gray paint and the white paint are used across a couple of areas. The white specifically for background work with bone and that kind of stuff. The gray paint obviously is the main feature for the legs, and then we used black paint for the legs as well, and a couple other little details. We also did use some shadow paint, which I actually don't have here because I put that around the eyeball, but I think you can probably guess that's what we used. And finally, we went with some deep red paint for the eyeballs, and maybe a couple other touches here and there. So nothing too confusing. I think the only color that you could maybe argue is somewhat mandatory inventory for this build is going to be the orange pumpkin, but I mean, a pumpkin could really be any color you want. I just figure if you can go with something a bit more realistic, this is probably the one to go with. So with the paints covered, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the other chest where we'll cover all of our walls and our blocks. Now, unsurprisingly, we went with some copper plating and some tin plating wall. This is going to be for all those metallic elements. We also use some cog wall because it adds a little bit of movement and I really like the way it works. To hide a few things, we used echo wall just to kind of make everything nice and square and even, so nothing was hanging out of the way. Then used a bit of luminite brick wall. This is just a couple of stray sections that I think look pretty nice and give it a little bit more of a feel and some texture. And same thing with the platinum brick wall, which pretty much we only used around the neckline as we did with the luminite brick, so looks pretty good. Also used it in the gears as well as using disc wall in the gears. This is kind of the standard way that I make them at the moment. We also use some wrought iron fence around the build as well. And when it comes to Crimson Scab and Living Leaf Wall and a Corrupt Tendril Wall, this is really all for trees and that kind of thing. Now, the one unique wall I will say that maybe is less familiar is going to be our Bone Block Wall, which is simply in and around the teeth, because not only does it match the coloring and the feel, but because of the shape, it kind of looks like teeth that are in the background. So I did like the effect that it provided, and it wasn't really unsightly or like too much of a contrast compared to the other materials. So this one was a nice choice here, but you could probably use something else. Now, when it comes to blocks, guys, obviously we used a lot of counterparts, but, you know, we're going to have some copper plating, of course, and some tin plating. I mean, the legs are pretty much all made of metal, so you're probably going to want to include these. There is a bit of palladium and some luminite brick and some midnight confetti, which, again, the midnight confetti and the luminite are obviously in the sort of, I guess, metal plate in his head. I just thought it was a nice little touch. When it comes to actual gears, we used a combination of cog wall, some junction boxes. We also used a couple of streamers here and there as well, just to give it a little bit of that wire connected feel, which I think worked out pretty well. In the legs, we also decided to go with the grates, which I think I pointed out a little bit earlier. And then beyond that, just a bit of flesh block and some smoke block. And the flesh block is actually really just for the tongue in certain spots. And the smoke block, of course, is where the palladium column is, where we have these quick little exhausts. Now for the background, we use some desert fossil along with some bone and some bone wand to actually place it down. This gives it a kind of, I guess, derelict or abandoned or inhospitable feel to the actual area. We also did make use of a monolith, in this case the solar one, and I think overall the atmosphere for this design is pretty good. So yeah, that pretty much covers all of the materials, guys. Hopefully that gives you a good enough idea of what was used, and of course if you want to make a replica or something similar, well, you'll have all of the materials right there in front of you. Right, so with that said, guys, let's move on with the rest of the video. All right, guys, so there you go. There is our Halloween contest submission done. This cyborg pumpkin spider thing is really, really cool. I love the way that it turned out. It actually turned out a lot better than I thought, because at the beginning with the issues that I kind of just went through, it wasn't good. It just felt wrong, and I'm really glad I took the time to sort of reassess, come back, and just kind of, well, make it work into something that felt very, well, Halloween themed, but also spooky. That was the idea. And before you ask, my favorite part is definitely the legs. I mean, I just like how long and creepy they look, and I try to make them kind of sharp and, well, I guess interesting in some ways. So I do like the way that those came out. I'm also really happy with how the tongue came out, considering I wasn't sure if I was going to add that. So all in all, pretty happy with it. Now, despite how much I like those two features, I'm not so happy with how the little cyborg brain implant thingy came in. I don't know if that really comes across as looking like that. That was the idea, but you know, I think a little bit more effort there could have helped. The same goes for the landscaping, which I think needed a few additional little touches and details, but overall I am pretty happy with this design. Now, all that said, I don't necessarily think that this build is going to even rank in the top 3. I think some people are going to submit some absolutely amazing submissions that are just going to blow people away. I've actually seen one already, and you'll probably know who that is in the not so far future. But the point is, let me know what you guys think of the build in the comments down below. What did you like? What would you change? And maybe if you're thinking about submitting something for this contest, which I strongly encourage, guys, don't worry if you're not an amazing builder or pumpkin carver. It's open to anyone, and it's kind of a fun little thing to participate and maybe get recognized within the community. So give it a shot. Anyways, with all that said, guys, thank you so much for watching until the end of this video. As always, thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. We will see you in the next one.